Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of On Queer Street, a boxing podcast hosted by myself, and this week joined by the one and only Charles Farrell of Next Big Pod fame and Deadspin and 40 years of boxing expertise as well. Hate to claim that you made your name on the back of our podcasts in the last year. That would be a little bit selling you a little bit short, I think. But Charles, thank you very much for joining us, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so much, Sam. My pleasure.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. That's my echo. Right. So shall we dive straight into it? I'm sure everyone wants to know your thoughts on Ward versus Kovalev. Obviously, Andre Ward collecting a unanimous decision of 114, 113 across the board. First of all, Charles, how did you have it scored?
I didn't. I decided that I was more interested in watching it recreationally. For me, scoring is hard work. It's something I take really seriously. And so I wound up watching it as it played out, and really, in the end, only had an impression as to how the fight wound up. But my overall impression was that it was a very, very close fight. I had no quarrel with the decision. I would have had no quarrel had Kovalev gotten the decision, and even a draw would have been acceptable to me.
I find there's kind of a range of acceptable scores with most fights, aren't there? And usually the range isn't too wide, but I felt on this one, I saw scores ranging from 115 to 112 Ward, which I felt was really pushing it, but maybe just about conceivable, all the way to 117, 110 Kovalev, which several quite prominent, writers, not just sort of Kovalev fans, actually had. I think Dougie Fisher from the Ring magazine, as well as some other bloggers in the States, had it 117, 110 to Kovalev, and obviously that's being the Russian. But I felt that the range of acceptable scores was extraordinarily wide for a fight as big as this, and especially a fight where I feel like so many people predicted it would be quite clear cut for Ward, I think.
Well, I certainly thought it would be clear cut for Ward. I mean, I had a pretty clear picture of how I thought the fight would go, and it vaguely corresponded to what I had in mind. But I thought that all things considered, Kovalev was much tougher than I anticipated, and to a very limited extent, I would say that Ward maybe underperformed a little bit.
Well, yes, that was going to be my next question, because I felt it was much more a case of Kovalev, I wouldn't say overperforming, but Kovalev kind of exceeding certain expectations rather than Ward performing badly. And to be fair, I haven't seen any Ward fans trying to claim that it was a case of their man having a bad night, because I really don't think it was. I don't think Ward did particularly badly. I think he adjusted very well to the shock of the early rounds. And I think both men fought pretty well. I couldn't see any, I mean, there were small mistakes, as there always are, but I couldn't see any huge errors by either guy.
No, I don't think either one made huge errors. I think essentially they both fought variations of the fight that intended to fight. And really, who you think won probably comes down to who you think was more successful in imposing the style that they had in mind. I think they both fought well.
I'd agree with that. I think imposing the style is absolutely key. I predicted before the fight, I always felt that it would be a Ward decision, but I always felt it would be quite close. And I'm wrong about these things far more often than I'm right. But for this one, I predicted that it would be a controversial Ward decision and a very, very close fight. And I think I was maybe controversial, slightly too strong, but it was there was debate, wasn't there? Certainly. And I do agree that with the people who are saying, calling it a robbery is way overblowing the cards, and I agree with that. But equally, I think that the majority did score it for Kovalev, and I certainly felt that it was a close but clear Kovalev. To me, it was a clear Kovalev win, because I couldn't find, and I watched it back again. I usually don't like watching them back that much, but I felt I had a duty to watch this back again, and I had it I just couldn't find 7 rounds to give to Ward. The first time I gave him 5 rounds, I had it 115, 112 Kovalev. The second time I gave Ward the 12th, which I'd given to Kovalev the first time, but I felt that was a very, very, very even round. Gave it to Ward the second time and had it to Kovalev by a point. But I really feel, and Al Bernstein has expressed this as well, obviously not being a commentator on the fight, he can be a bit more opinionated, but he said that he felt the knockdown was the difference, and the best you could give Ward was 6 rounds, and it was really the slow start that cost him, and that's how I saw it. But did you feel that Ward sort of clearly won, or was it a sort of 1 or 2 point thing?
No, I thought it was I thought it was a very close fight, and I've seen it twice myself. I haven't scored it either time because the second time, I find objectivity is very difficult to maintain if you already know what the result is. You overplay certain things, you underplay. Although I did see it the second time without commentary, and I was able to listen to the responses of the crowd, which often make a big difference in terms of how hard a punch is. They're a pretty good barometer of how hard a punch is. I did give Ward the 12th round both times, but I thought that it really was a close enough fight so that a 1 point decision, unanimous decision, could certainly not be considered a robbery. As a matter of fact, to be honest, I've been a little bit surprised at the amount of emotion that this fight has engendered in people. I mean, it has solicited a tremendous amount of response, or elicited a tremendous amount of response. I don't recall a fight recently that has gotten the reaction that this one has.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great that the reaction has generally been, although there has been a sort of fringe element of crying robbery and corruption and everything else, I think the reaction generally has been, let's get a rematch. We'd love to watch a rematch. And you have to think that, I don't know how many pay-per-views this sold. I would estimate maybe around 200,000, something like that. But you'd have to think that there's real demand for a rematch, I think. And these guys could make some serious money.
Yes, I expect that that's exactly what will happen. And I think that Kovalev, who I felt had the deficiency of not having a lot of heart, will come back to this fight, convinced that he can win it and probably not fearful at all. And I think Ward, by nature, is a guy who does not like to leave any questions unanswered. So not only will they both get paid a lot, and I think they'll get paid, certainly career highs. I think as fighters, temperamentally, both of them will be anxious or eager to have this fight, to have the rematch.
I agree with you, and I think that both guys, in a sort of paradoxical sense, will feel they could do much better and impose themselves much more. I think even though they both feel they won, they will both also feel that they could leave less doubt the second time. I think especially Ward, who obviously will be banking on sort of not having such. He'll be adjusted to acclimatized, I should say, to Kovalev's power to an extent. I really did feel that I was quite shocked watching it. I actually purposely I'd been to a friend's sort of dinner party the night before, and had got home, passed out, and purposely just woken up and gone straight to the computer and watched it without checking Twitter or anything else like that, because I find it really, like you say, if I know the result, I pay much less attention when I'm trying to watch it and score it myself. So I watched it blind, as they say, and I felt that Ward was really shocked by the power in the first 2 or 3 rounds, and obviously that's something that he won't have the shock factor to contend with second time.
Well, I noticed that, and I noticed in both the times I watched it, that he got hit with a very, very hard left jab in the first round, early in the first round. And it clearly, I won't say hurt him exactly, but I think it unsettled him. I think he didn't expect to be hit quite that hard. And when he got knocked down by a punch that he didn't see. And it was a very hard punch. And I mean, he recovered quite well, but it did change his mindset. And I'm not necessarily a big fan of Virgil Hunter as a trainer per se. I don't think he's a great nuts and bolts trainer, but I do think he's a tremendous psychologist. And I think he understands Andre Ward really well. And my impression was that he was really instrumental in getting Ward through those first very difficult rounds, giving him just the right information and sort of information that was imparted, in perfect increments. It's the only time I can remember seeing Ward where I think for a period of time he was a little bit uncertain.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think, like you said, first of all, he showed a very, very good chin, because he was back up, and although he was quite timid for a couple of minutes after the knockdown, he wasn't wobbly visibly, and it was Kovalev caught him square on the chin with that punch. We've seen Kovalev hit other guys with far less clean shots than that, and they've been unable to meet, to get up in before the count of 10. And I thought Ward was straight up, wasn't he, at about 4 or 5? And for a moment I thought, oh my God, he's done. He could get stopped here. And then you saw him sort of go back to his corner, lick his wounds, and Hunter. I agree with you. I think Ward is such a single-minded guy that he doesn't need someone sort of telling him the keys to the fight, or sort of telling him to use a particular punch or a particular tactic. He needs a guy who's going to kind of stoke the fire inside him, I suppose, and make sure he builds the intensity up at the right times, and sort of saves himself for the right moments in the fight. And I agree with you. I'm still a bit, I don't know what the word is, a bit confused by Hunter, because I feel his style is useless with certain fighters. I think him talking to guys like Andre Berto, who might be physically talented but don't have 10% of the IQ that Ward has in the ring. I think Virgil Hunter with guys like that is a terrible matchup. But yes, I agree with you with Ward, where it's a guy who maybe needs he needs someone to sort of reinforce what he's already thinking, if that makes sense, rather than be told. He's not going to go back to the corner and say, I don't know what to do, I can't figure this guy out, can you help me? He doesn't rely on the tactics, I suppose, so much.
Well, I remember Ray Arcel talking about Duran. And of course, Duran had a fabulous corner in Freddie Brown and Arcel. And they said, well, what did you tell him? And he said, he knew how to fight. We didn't tell him anything. We cleaned him up, prepared him, and pushed him out again. And once he was in the ring, he knew exactly what to do. And I think Ward is one of those guys. He knows exactly what to do. You don't tell him how to fight. He knows how to fight.
So to an extent, sorry, Charles, to an extent, he can think his way through a fight on his own. He doesn't need anyone to hold his hand, right?
He doesn't need anyone to hold his hand. What he needed in this case, and what he got in this case, was first to be reassured that he was fine. Because he's not used to seeing himself down, and he's not used to seeing himself hurt. So I think it was good to hear from Hunter, you're fine, you're okay. That's not a strategic analysis, it's an emotional analysis. And I think a couple of other times, what Hunter did is he sort of gave him an assessment of how the fight was going, which again is not a technical piece of advice, do this, do that. It's, here's how I think we stand right now. Bear that in mind. And that was perfect.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it was really in stark contrast to the undercard, where there was some truly shocking advice given from the corners of various fighters. Real head scratching stuff. Obviously, we'll get onto that in a moment. I just wanted to touch on briefly scoring and how, I guess, how subjective it can be, and how people can kind of become so entrenched, on opposite sides of the debate. You've scored this round wrong, and they are completely convinced that, there is just no way that it can justify being scored for the other guy a particular round of a fight. And I wanted to talk about comparative scoring, which I'm sure is something you're aware of, but it's essentially, just for any listeners who don't know, and I'm sure most of you do, so please don't be patronized, but it's where you score a fight based on the performance of the fighters in the rounds leading up to that point, rather than scoring a round based on the criteria, of clean punching, effective aggression, ring generalship, and all the rest of it. So, for example, I found, Charles, I'd be interested to see who you scored round 3 for in the Ward-Kovalev fight, because I found that was a perfect example of comparative scoring, because I think about 50% of the fans watching scored that for Ward.
I did not. I scored it for Kovalev, but that's a round that is a perfect example, because it was a close round, and Ward had come from a disastrous round. So I take your point. I mean, comparatively speaking, he seems to have done very, very well.
Yeah. And people kind of score it. They score it based on, well, Ward's improved from round 2.
Exactly.
Because he hasn't been knocked down and he hasn't been hurt. And Kovalev has got worse in a way, because in the last round, he hurt Ward and knocked him down. And this round, he hasn't. So in that sense, according to the criteria of the previous round, Ward is now, is ahead and should be winning. But obviously, if you actually score it based on clean punches landed, damage done, and all the rest of it, to my eye, Kovalev still outlanded Ward, and he also still was clearly in the early part of the fight, clearly landing the harder punches.
Clearly. Well, I think, let me say something about this, because I think that what happens, all fights have a narrative arc. It's inevitable. And we all watch the narrative arc, and, and that makes up the stories that we tell about the fight after the fact. But each round is new. It has to be seen in as a completely discrete 3 minutes. It does not have any, and that's what people don't do.
Has to be judged in isolation, right? According to the objective criteria. Yeah.
That's exactly what has to happen. That's right.
But of course, like you say, it's sort of almost human nature, and it's certainly the commercial nature of the broadcasters to draw, like you say, a wider narrative arc of, we heard Max Kellerman, who I usually like, but I think is very, very, either he's very close to Andre Ward or he's just a huge Andre Ward fan, because the start of the 3rd round, he was immediately selling the idea of a Ward comeback before there was any evidence at all that was actually taking place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, Max, he's a young guy, by my standards, a young guy, maybe not by everyone else's. And there's a degree of fan about him in general. And that comes across to me as callow. He's a bright guy, but he still has heroes. And I don't think that that's a job where you can afford to have heroes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, obviously, everyone used to laugh at him bringing up Pernell Whitaker every 5 minutes, and I think you still see it with Roy Jones, don't you? Where he's just, Roy Jones is his hero, and you can hear it in the way that he talks to him and the way he compares fighters to him. And anyone who resembles Roy Jones in any way will always be sort of in Kellerman's good books by default.
No, that's right. I mean, and of course, we all have our favorite types of fighters, and I suppose we're drawn toward praising them more than, the Arturo Gatti kind of fighters don't do much for me. And, there are people who swear by them, and I understand that, but it's completely subjective. And yeah.
Can I ask, sorry, just on that point, what's if you were picking a sort of dream style for a fighter to have, what would you go for?
Well, I tend to like boxers better than I like punchers, because I think they tend to be steadier in their performance. For me, the perfect fighters would be, Duran, is a perfect fighter. I think Ray Robinson, of course, is the best fighter I've ever seen. But someone like Joe Gans or Ike Williams would be the models for me. Guys who do everything well, and who are versatile and who are stylish. That's my favorite type of fighter.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So you prefer guys who don't have any obvious weaknesses, whereas, like we say, quite often the most popular fighters are the ones who have huge strengths but also glaring weaknesses that could potentially sort of put them on the edge of disaster at any time. And a lot of fans love those type of fighters, you know, like Gatti, whose face would fall apart after 3 rounds, or, you know, even guys like Amir Khan, where a lot of people Khan gets great viewing figures because you know that he's on the brink of disaster at any given time. Bit of a nightmare to promote, I imagine, but also it's great sort of drama for the fan.
Right. I mean, that's why people loved, you know, people like Matthew Saad Muhammad, you know, because you knew you were going to get this back and forth fight where he was going to be in serious trouble and he would probably win it, but you never know for sure if he was going to win it. And it makes for very, very compelling viewing. But the other thing is, I think that people develop great empathy with the fighters who they like. And maybe it's because I was in this business for a long, long time, but I don't identify with fighters in any way at all. So when I see a fighter who is a dramatic fighter, I never put myself in that fighter's shoes. I can never imagine myself to be in a situation like his. And I think what happens with these really blood and guts fighters who overcome adversity to win, I think people have an incredibly strong sense of identification with those fighters, and they become popular.
Yeah, I mean, it's the dream, isn't it? Everyone likes to think, well, yeah, if I got in the ring and I got knocked down, then yeah, I'd get back up and I'd come back and fight twice as hard. And everyone, you know, that's sort of, isn't it? Rather than, and it's so much more exciting and more dramatic than the guy who just doesn't ever get knocked down in the first place. Yeah.
Right. No, that's right. You know, so I mean, as you know, I used to manage Freddie Norwood, who nobody liked. And, you know, there was a period of time for a few years where he was unquestionably the best fighter at his weight. He could not be beaten at 122 pounds. But I couldn't give him away. And there were guys who were doing really good business who we couldn't get near. And, you know, I understand that.
It's I suppose at times it's more show than business, isn't it, to an extent? And like you say, Norwood was a guy where you could appreciate what he did in the ring. And I think personally, you know, the performance against Marquez, for example, was phenomenal, a fantastic performance of that era. But at the same time, a guy like Marquez who gets knocked down, gets back up in pretty much every fight, is always going to draw a crowd. And it's, yeah, I don't know. It's a sort of strange dichotomy, isn't it? Where you want to you've got your human nature, and I admit I'd be the same if there was a fight going on. You know, if you've got Floyd against Maidana, and Maidana is just plodding around following Floyd, he can't get near him, and Floyd's just landing on him, you know, and winning every round, racking up the rounds. And then you've got Pacquiao Marquez on the other side, where they're both getting hit and they both got their noses broken after two rounds or whatever, and they're both, you know, you'd always watch the less technically sound and the less kind of pure, but the more dramatic fight, wouldn't you? It's kind of human nature, and it goes against the purest ideal.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I think there's a line of demarcation for that, though. I mean, for example, you wouldn't bypass Mayweather Maidana to watch you know, a tough man competition. So even though comparatively speaking, maybe a fight with Pacquiao and Marquez is not as technically adroit as a fight that Mayweather would have. You're still talking about not just a high energy fight, you know, high action fight, but you're talking about a fight like that conducted at a very, very advanced level.
Yeah, perhaps that's not the best. I was thinking of obviously the fourth fight. Perhaps that's not the best example. Maybe something a bit more like Corrales Castillo, where they're clearly on a lower skill level to Floyd. You know, let's say Floyd winning a shutout against Canelo, say, for example, that performance. So you've got that performance, and then you set that against Corrales Castillo going to war, and the skill level is visibly lower, but at the same time, because of the margin of error is increased, and so I guess the margin for drama increases alongside it. And it's a strange kind of sweet spot. You need to hit somewhere in the middle, don't you? And I guess actually, funnily enough, something like Marquez versus Pacquiao is the perfect hybrid of incredibly high technical boxing, high level, but also that that permanent sort of impending risk of a knockdown or a guy getting seriously hurt, or a complete war breaking out.
No, that's right. I mean, it's compelling sort of at every level, and it's unpredictable, and you know that it's going to be. I mean, one of the things about a fight like that is it's always bilateral. I mean, there's never a point at which you can say, well, this guy is just wiping out this other guy. This is a slaughter. That's not going to happen. And of course, that holds your attention too. If Mayweather, now I understand Mayweather is coming back. We'll be fighting in May against Pacquiao.
Oh, is that, have you got sources sort of suggesting that?
I do.
Oh, okay.
So my guess is that it's probably pretty solid, and that it's already been, I think it's the MGM Grand has already been set aside for it. But if Pacquiao, I'm sorry, if Mayweather were to come back to fight Demetrius Andrade, that for me obviously that would be as dumb a decision business-wise as he could make, and he doesn't make dumb decisions. But that would be a fight that would really be compelling for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'd agree with you, because I can watch Andrade. I actually, funnily enough, I don't know what it is. I really, really like Andrade, and I think maybe it's a kind of underdog thing where he's quite clearly being avoided by quite a lot of the division, and he's being sort of frozen out to an extent. And also, I guess he has, in a weird way, that self-destructive streak where he seems intent on sabotaging his own career by not signing contracts and sort of not doing the administrative side of things. And obviously the Kulkai fight is a perfect example where it fell apart because of his own sort of oversights. But I agree with you. I watched the Martirosyan fight again recently, and that was quite a dull 12-round decision. But I just really like watching him fight. And I wish, if there was one fighter I wish would get a big push, it would probably be Andrade, because I think he has his ceiling is incredibly high, I believe. Incredibly high.
And who knows at what weight? I mean, certainly he'd be able to fight up to 168.
Yeah, well, he's got the frame, hasn't he? I think is he about he's just over 6 foot, isn't he? I think something like that.
With a long reach, yes.
Yeah, and exactly, extraordinarily long reach, like to the point where his gloves are sort of almost scraping the floor when he's crouching down, sort of lining up his shots. He's a guy I really like to fight, and I think I just hope I'd love the Lara fight to get made. I'm not sure if I can see it happening, but I think that will be a sort of coming out party for him, and I just think he beats everyone at the division and everyone in the top 10, and I hope he gets the shots. But like you say, he's a guy where take sort of some of my friends who are, I suppose, casual fans who might watch 2 or 3 events a year, who know the big names but aren't really, they'll watch Mayweather Pacquiao and they'll probably stay up until 5 a.m. but they may not watch anything for 6 months after that. They wouldn't enjoy Andrade at all, but they would absolutely love watching Pacquiao fight, and I think that's part of the reason why they were so disappointed by the Mayweather, because they'd seen how exciting Pacquiao could be, and I guess they sort of they hadn't been paying as closer attention, so they bought into the idea that he was still in his prime and he could still pull the trigger, to the same extent. But yes, I agree with you. I think Andrade is a guy where I have to say he did show me he showed me a bit more killer instinct. I thought the way he finished Nelson was quite impressive, because he could have easily coasted to the 12 to a decision.
That was my favorite performance of the year. I thought that was a legitimately virtuosic performance. I thought we were looking at a great fighter that night.
Yeah, I agree with you, because look, Nelson's not a world beater, but he's a very, very, I would say he's a very high level gatekeeper for that division, where he's a guy where if you don't get past him, you're not going to sort of break into the top 10. But he's been beaten before. But he gave Martirosyan a very, very tough fight. Andrade won every minute of every round and really beat him up.
And more importantly, he also knocked him out, which is something that no one had done before. If I'm remembering correctly, that's Nelson's only knockout loss, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe it is, and I'm not sure he'd even been down many times before that, because Nelson's a pretty tough guy who's sort of he's lost some tough decisions, but no, I don't think he'd ever been knocked out before. And I'll box track it in a moment.
He's 6'3", he's just a nightmare to fight.
Yeah, exactly, and very, very awkward, and sort of the guy where we saw him beat Tony Harrison, didn't we, the year before? And he gave Vanez a very tough fight, and he was an awkward, tricky guy, and yes, he's been knocked out once by Andrade, and I wasn't expecting an Andrade KO. I thought Andrade might cruise a little bit to try and get the rounds in, but I agree with you. I think that's a fantastic performance that has sort of gone under the radar to an extent, which is a shame.
I think that if there's a way that this can happen, when the time comes, Andrade is going to be the guy who's going to beat Golovkin.
Well, I think that fight was actually talked about, in the media at least, maybe about a year or so ago when Andrade was inactive. I think just after he'd been stripped, and he talked about potentially jumping up to middleweight. If he couldn't get a shot again at 154. And he said, he'd fight Golovkin and all the rest of it. And he made some absurd demand. I think he asked for 50-50 or something like that. And, it was one of those situations where you sort of I really want to root for him. But I remember he asked for 50-50 against Canelo as well. And you kind of roll your eyes and say, come on, you're making it really hard for us to support you here.
That's true. Well, I don't know that much about his family who, are in his corner, but I know about boxing here in the northeast United States.
He's Rhode Island, isn't he?
He's Rhode Island, and I know Rhode Island boxing awfully well, and it's really defined by provincialism, and at this point, Andrade's biggest problem is provincialism. He needs to separate himself from the people who are surrounding him, and move in with a major promoter, a real trainer. He needs to do everything at the most sophisticated level of the business, and at that point, nothing will stop him. If that doesn't happen, I don't know.
I agree with you. I think he needs to leave his comfort zone to an extent.
Yes.
But yes, agreed. We're very high on Andrade. I agree with you. I've been, ever since I saw him. I think, to be honest, the Martirosyan fight was the first time I'd watched him properly. I think I watched him against Freddie Hernandez before that, and again, that was a fight where you felt he could have stopped Hernandez, but he kind of was content to box to a decision. But then I was impressed with him against Vanez because I thought he made Vanez look very, very, very sort of one-dimensional. And Vanez isn't great, but he's a pretty good sort of contender. And he looked, and I think there's an argument he beat Jamel Charlo, and he gave Lara the first time at least. He gave Lara a tough fight, and Andrade really sort of outclassed him, I'd say.
Well, he's Vanez is just an incredible overachiever. He's just a really, really tough guy who never thinks about losing.
Yeah, doesn't do any one thing amazingly well. But equally has is mentally tough and will keep coming all night. I agree with you. I do think he is greater than the sum of his parts, I suppose, in a sense.
Very well put. That's right.
Charles, just before we move on to the undercard from Saturday, because I know the people want to talk about judging and all the rest of it. Rather than scoring, we're going to move on to judging here. A slight subtle difference. I'm just going to put out the question for the 6 degrees of Tony Dodson question, which is this week. Everyone who's listening, you can have a go at this. Send it to me. Send your answers on Twitter or drop them in the chat or whatever it is. Remember that the rules are you have to connect a fighter to another fighter via common opponents, in as fewer moves as possible. And this week we've got, beginning with Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. and ending with Josh Warrington, who is a sort of cult hero, I suppose, on the UK featherweight scene. So that's Chavez Senior to Josh Warrington, and we'll come back to this at the end of the show and give the answers. But yeah, drop your if you want to have a go, drop it in the chat or send me a message on Twitter or whatever it is. Now, Charles, moving on. Don't give me your answer on that yet.
Let me just back up for one second.
Yes, please do.
It turns out if that was the criterion, I cheated. I thought when the connection had to be any connection, direct connection between the fighters. So although I made a connection, partially it was through a trainer.
Yeah, you did Freddie Roach, didn't you? In that? Yes. No. I didn't have the heart to tell you. I thought I'd wait until we were on the air. No. It has to be only opponents. So you were about 90% of the way there, but I think you're missing sort of one link. But I do really enjoy this game because you invariably find multiple different routes from and amazingly you'll find how close sort of a complete non-entity is to an all-time great. And that they might only have sort of be 3 opponents apart, but we'll come back to that at the end of the show and get our answers together. Now, on the undercard for Kovalev Ward was obviously what was intended to be a bit of a coming out party for Maurice Hooker, who again I think I had seen him fight once, possibly on either Friday Night Fights or Showbox. And he faced off against Darlis Perez. Perez, we know in the UK quite well. He's come over here and fought twice against Anthony Crolla, arguably lost both times. Obviously escaped with a draw and then got knocked out in the rematch. He's also lost to Yuri Ortiz Gamboa. Doesn't really have a win above sort of NABO level, I wouldn't say, but did hold a belt for a while at 135. Perez was moving up in weight to light welter. And fighting against Maurice Hooker out of Texas, a big Rock Nation prospect, apparently a big puncher coming off a bit of a knockout streak. And Charles, do you want to tell us sort of how the fight unfolded and how you saw it? I'm assuming you watched this one.
I have to say I watched intermittently because it was apparent to me around into the fight that Maurice Hooker was an extremely limited fighter, and that he is a guy who's been, for whatever reason, and to be honest, I can't figure out the reason, remarkably well protected. And I inferred early on in the fight that it was going to go to a decision and that Perez was going to thoroughly outbox him, and that because he'd been so well protected, that Hooker was not going to lose.
It's funny you say that because obviously I actually watched this originally on the HBO broadcast where they weren't really talking about the judges or the potential for a robbery, but on Sky, the UK broadcast of the card, Paulie Malignaggi was our sort of guest commentary, and he mentioned after about 8 rounds, he said, I know we've got it. I think the quote was, I know we've got it wide, guys. I think they had it 7 rounds to 1 at that point. And he said, I know we've got it wide, but you have to remember Perez is as much of an opponent as an opponent can ever possibly be tonight. And Hooker is their guy. He's undefeated, and we'll have to see what these cards say. But I think we might be in for a bit of a surprise. And so it's fascinating that you had the same sort of anticipation, I suppose.
Well, Malignaggi, I really got great admiration for him. I mean, it's not as if he doesn't protect the company a little bit, but he's not a company guy. And maybe it's because, he was a fighter himself and didn't always get the best breaks. But he sees what's coming. What I don't understand, look, this kind of business is something I do understand. If you're protecting somebody, he does not lose to, a fighter like Darlis Perez. It's important. And so if it goes 10 rounds, he gets the decision if it's at all possible. What I don't understand in this guy's case is why. I'm not sure what the machinery behind him is for. He's not a guy who does anything very well. I don't think he's got the best chin in the world. He doesn't seem marketable. What's the buildup about?
It was odd, wasn't it? Because I felt, and I think actually both sets of commentary, HBO and Sky, commented on this within the first round. They said he looked really scared to get hit, and Perez was not a big puncher at 135, let alone at 140. And
Right.
Hooker looked really scared to get punched, and he was getting caught clean time and time again. And it's one of those. Do you think it could be a case where the fight that always reminds me of is, do you remember Carlos Quintana, who's one of my kind of favorite niche fighters, I suppose. I used to really like watching Quintana fight. You know, we talk about boxers who aren't particularly crowd pleasing, but I felt Quintana was a guy who was, like we said earlier, way more than the sum of his parts. And I thought he had a tremendous sort of heart in the ring. Do you remember when he fought? I think it was on an undercard of possibly Pacquiao Bradley. I think he fought DeAndre Lattimore, who was a fighter out of St. Louis, I think. Or the Midwest somewhere. It may have been Ohio. Do you remember that fight at all? I think it was about 4 years ago.
Not off the top of my head.
Because it's on YouTube if you get the chance to watch it. But it was a fight where Lattimore was promoted by Golden Boy. He was undefeated at the time, or he may have had one loss, a close loss. But he was, in line for a title shot. Quintana was 36 or whatever. He'd fought sort of twice in 3 or 4 years. Quintana just absolutely dominated every minute of the round. Found that he could hit him clean whenever he wanted. And after 6 rounds, he went for the KO and he got rid of him. And I think it might have been a sense of Quintana's corner saying to him, if this goes the distance, we're not going to get it. And they never revealed the cards, but it looked to me, because Quintana went from boxing very, very patiently and just sort of countering to coming out about halfway through the fight clearly with the intention of knocking the guy out and swinging power shot after power shot. And he got rid of him within a couple of minutes. And I feel like maybe, would you say, as a comparison, that it was almost naive of Perez's team to maybe not tell him to maybe go for the knockdown, or go for the knockout, or try and get a knockdown or something, because obviously they would have known that they were the opponent, right?
They would have known that they were the opponent, and since clearly he wasn't told to get knocked out, I am a little surprised that they didn't say to him, do what you have to do. Maybe it's because he's not a puncher, but I agree with you. I mean, I think since he was landing his shots and he wasn't getting anything in return, there was no downside to his trying to win the knockout. I mean, I certainly don't think that Hooker would have knocked him out.
No, and it wasn't just that Hooker wasn't sort of hurting him. He was barely landing any power punches. I mean, it was just the occasional jab, wasn't it? And again, both sets of analysts called it. They said he's not sitting down on any of his punches. His balance is all over the place, and he's up on the balls of his feet every time. So he's getting no power and no leverage at all. It was such an odd performance, and you have to think. I mean, what would you do with a guy like Hooker in this situation? Coming off the draw, would you go for the rematch possibly, or?
No, absolutely not. What I would do, he's now technically 20, he's still undefeated by technical standards, which means that he's got some value in the marketplace as an opponent. I would look around to see who has got the money to pay him, and I would put him in a title shot right away, and I'd cash him out.
So you would say, I think it was an eliminator, wasn't it? I forget which organization it was for. So you would put him in against someone like, I don't know, possibly, I'm trying to think the title list. I suppose they could, I don't even know if HBO would take that fight, to be honest, based on, imagine what Crawford would do with him. It wouldn't be nice to watch.
Well, I mean, he could be in a kind of interim opponent for Crawford. But I'm trying to think if there's more money somewhere else for him.
I'm just going to look up the. My mind's gone blank. I'm trying to think of the champions at 140.
For example, what they could do with him? They could put him in with somebody like Victor Postol as a way of reestablishing Postol.
Or one I'm just looking is possibly ship him off to England or to the UK, I should say, and put him in against Ricky Burns or something like that. Perfect. An easy defense for Burns. Yes. Yeah, cash him out. maybe get a couple of $100,000, and then he's gone forever. He's the sort of guy I could see him, if he hadn't looked quite so bad, I could see him as an Adrian Broner opponent in the future. But unfortunately, I think he was even too bad for Broner, sadly.
Well, I mean, except that Broner has looked so horrible. The problem is that Broner doesn't bring money to the table anymore. So, you know, there's not a whole lot of money available. I think Ricky Burns would be the best payday available for him, and that's an incredibly easy fight for Burns. You know, who's a vulnerable fighter.
Yes, he is, and I've been ranting for many months about Burns. I think Burns is way over the hill, but I would still pick him to very handily beat Hooker. And of course, fighting in Scotland, there'd be no chance of a robbery in Hooker's favour. So yes, do you think he could be a sort of one more appearance and then gone for good sort of a guy?
Well, it depends on how. I mean, obviously, my suggestion would be to stop spending any money on him at all and start to make your money back. So what I would do is, you know, you put him in with Burns for whatever you can get. He loses, maybe Ricky gets the knockout. He should be able to, and that helps him. I mean, because you know Ricky can use all the knockouts he can get. You give Hooker 3 more low-level wins against anybody, doesn't matter. They'll, you know, whoever they put him in with, the commissions will approve, coming off a loss. And then you look around to see who we can do this to again, you know, with again. At that point, that's about as far as he can go. The thing that bewilders me is where's the money coming from to keep a guy like that undefeated? Just bewilders me.
Yes, and what did they see in him that made them think it was a worthwhile investment? That's what really puzzles me. I mean, who's talent scouting in the gyms in Dallas and pick this guy out as being Texas isn't short of good fighters. I don't know how he rose to the top somehow.
Well, that's really the question I'm asking. That's the heart of the question. Why this guy?
It is very strange, isn't it? And I think, do you think as well, this is something that was suggested to me in the aftermath of Saturday, that because Rock Nation are a new organization who are sort of still finding their feet to an extent in the sport, do you think that when they seek to influence judges, as it were, they do it in a kind of more over, almost a clumsier way than some of the more experienced promoters? Do you think there's an element of that?
There has to be, because they don't have the kind of track record that vouchsafes the ongoing opportunities that that judges would get, that people in the commission would get. You know, if you're doing business with somebody for years and years and you're providing steady employment for them, you don't have to say very much of anything. There's no clumsiness that is likely to take place, because everybody understands what the process is. They know how the game is played, and you don't have to tell people this is the red corner, this is the blue corner. They all know that. With a fledgling company, sometimes those signals are not as well integrated into business as usual. And so this kind of clumsiness can occur more easily.
I think someone described it to me. I thought this was very well put. They said it was a heavy-handed approach, which someone like Bob Arum, and where the wheels are so well oiled, he would never make it this obvious, I suppose.
Right. He would never. Well, I mean, there are mistakes. I mean, obviously, there are always mistakes. But you're right. I mean, again, it's a machine that has been established long since, and after a point it works itself, because you don't have to provide information on an ongoing basis to the people with whom you're doing business. That's a very big thing, you know, that as much as can be understood beforehand without much being said, the more seamlessly the entire operation goes. And with guys like Arum, and before him King, and with Golden Boy, very little has to be communicated directly. there's an inference that's drawn by everybody, at sort of every mechanical level underneath the promotion. They know what to do and they do it. And of course, the rewards with those guys who are in business in a very active way don't have to come about on a fight-by-fight basis. And that gives you tremendous freedom. If you don't have to fix a fight, for example, by making sure that you've got the judges, where you actually have to go to them in some way and do whatever you need to do to get them on your side. If it's understood that this is a business that will keep you active, keep you making money, keep you employed, keep you having a good time, keep you well treated in the various venues for years and years to come, it becomes a very subtle thing, because you don't have to fine tune it every single time. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. The palimpsest is in place. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think the sort of analogy you drew a moment ago about once promoters sort of find their feet, it becomes almost an automatic process. That's something we're really starting to see in the UK, where obviously we've spoken before about Eddie Hearn and about how he's sort of revived his father's company in boxing. And he's now been going full time as a boxing promoter for about 4.5 years, maybe almost 5 years. And in the last, I would say, 18 months, you've seen it kind of become an automatic thing, where these little, the benefits are now automatic for his fighters when they're, when the judges come over. And we've seen, especially this year, a run of real stinkers, where it starts off with the cards being maybe a round or two wide. Then it becomes fighters clearly losing, home fighters clearly losing, but only maybe taking a split decision. Then it becomes losses turning into draws. And now it's got to the point where it's clear defeats turning into landslide wins. I don't know if you saw the Jamie McDonnell fight from 2 weeks ago in Monte Carlo.
I did see it.
Well, did you agree with the rest of us that that I felt that was a pretty easy fight to score and that McDonnell lost?
I thought McDonnell lost by, in a way that was clear cut.
I think the consensus scorecard was around 8 rounds to 4 or 7 to 5, something like that. But it wasn't, it was, yes, a clear loss, without sort of being completely dominated, because that wouldn't be fair to him. But yes, he clearly lost. And I think one of the scorecards was 117, 111, 9 rounds to 3. And that was the same guy. It was Robert Hoyle, who's now on my watch list,
Right.
who then a week later gave Hooker 7 rounds against Perez. So I don't know if that guy's, having a particularly bad month. Has he got problems at home? I'm not sure what it is, but he doesn't seem to be in his right mind during November, at least.
Well, I think he's very much in his right mind. Robert Hoyle will be working for major promoters for as long as he lives, and this is why he's giving them what they want.
Mm.
The fact that you can see it and that your colleagues can see it and that maybe I can see it, that doesn't matter. What matters is what the guy's record is the day after the fight and what you can do with him the day after the fight. Really, the only thing that will come about for this is that people are going to be a little bit wary of Liborio Solis. I mean, he's the only one who,
Yeah. Exactly, that's the thing. Everyone knows what's happened. That's really what's so sad about it. Everyone knows what's happened. Everyone knows that something has gone on. Something nefarious has gone on the side of McDonnell, and yet the only loser will be Solis, because he won't be able to get the fights, and he will be marginalized to a greater extent. And in 6 months, no one will remember. No one will remember the cards. They'll just see a win, the green box on McDonnell's record, and he'll be up at a new weight, and it'll be completely forgotten. And it's a real shame.
Right.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, what will happen with Solis, of course, is that we'll see him against an up-and-coming kid, 6 months from now or maybe a year from now, and he'll come in at 126 pounds and he'll be slaughtered, and people won't have any sense that this is a really, really good fighter. This is just a guy who can't get fights and has to do a lot of things that he probably doesn't want to do, like come in undertrained or very, very heavy. In the fight with McDonald, clearly they had no business being in the same weight division.
No, that was the thing. I mean, I sort of, when the fight was initially made, I think I'd seen Solis once or twice before. I think I saw him when he fought Kono and won the title in Japan a few years ago. But obviously that was at 118. No, sorry. That was at what? Was it no, it was
15 at 15.
115. Sorry.
Yeah,
yes.
He's a very small guy.
Yeah, very small guy. I think he's 5'1" or 5'2", something like that. And Jamie McDonnell is obviously a big guy for the weight, even if he's not, very, very tall, very long. And the odds on, I actually bet money. I bet on the Solis decision, which was 16-1, just because I thought that was. I don't know what that odd that is in terms of the line in the US betting, but that's plus 16-1. That's plus 1,000 and something. And I just thought Solis probably won't win, but those odds are way too wide because he is a good fighter. And McDonnell, throughout the fight week, McDonnell was talking about moving up in weight, and he was talking about going to the States and fighting Raushi Warren in the new year. And I thought, okay, McDonnell is looking past this, and this could be a banana skin. And I just really didn't think that Jamie McDonnell, he's kind of I don't want to say a running joke in the UK, but he's kind of a source of humor in the sense that he's a really good fighter who has legitimately won world titles on the road and in the UK and has beaten some really good opponents. And yet he doesn't sell any tickets. He's not popular. He's in a very unglamorous division. And as a result, you will usually see him on boxing shows in the UK fighting at sort of 6 p.m, 5:30 p.m, maybe, when the arena is 90% empty. And he was put on this Monte Carlo card, clearly because he doesn't sell enough tickets to put him on a show in London. And I thought, well, they're never going to fix a McDonnell fight because he doesn't make them any money anyway.
Who cares? Right.
Exactly. And I couldn't believe it when I saw it because I don't know if you actually, I believe, you watched the Burns Relic fight, didn't you? Ricky Burns' last fight in was that at the beginning of October, something like that?
I think it was in yeah.
And you I think you scored it for Relic, didn't you? You said you felt it was a fairly clear win for him, the opponent again. But is that right? I think you scored it for him. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I think I did. I think that's right.
I think I recall talking to you in the aftermath and saying this was again an example of Relic having such a good start and then Burns being awarded rounds simply for not doing as badly. And I was sort of going off on a tangent and ranting about it all over the internet. And but in a sort of really dirty, nasty way, it made sense because they gave it to Burns by 118, 110, these awful cards that just didn't reflect the fight at all. But Ricky Burns was in an arena that was sold out, surrounded by his fans. So you can kind of see what they were trying to protect. But with McDonnell, I just don't understand. Unless they're planning to move him up and use him as an opponent against someone else, I don't know what it is. Maybe he's going to hop up in weight and fight a guy like Scott Quigg or fight a guy like
well, that's likely. Right, yeah. Of course. That's sort of what you have. I suspect that's exactly what will happen.
So they're sort of they're protecting him as an opponent in a strange
as an
way.
Opponent. Well, that happens fairly often. I mean, where they keep someone who's kept undefeated for a while, and of course the immediate conclusion someone comes up to is that the trajectory for him is to keep winning, but that's as likely to be untrue as it is to be true.
Yes, absolutely. And, undefeated records, 90% of the time, it's a case of matchmaking, isn't it? Rather than a case of, and obviously there are exceptions where it is a case of the talent of the fighter. But most of the time, even with, I'm thinking of sort of the world famous streaks like Pacquiao's streak from 2008 to 2013 or whatever it was. He had some phenomenal wins, but he was also carefully matched at certain points. And obviously, we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of talking about Floyd's opponents over the years, and how for every great win there was also a very carefully selected opponent as well. And yes, it is to an extent matchmaking. And Charles, sorry, this leads us on perfectly to the next subject, which I just wanted to get your thoughts on, which is sort of the current state of the heavyweight division. We always get loads of questions whenever you're going to be on the show to do with heavyweights, because of your sort of history with the division, I suppose, and also the fact that you can actually remember when it was when it really was the crown jewel of all the divisions. I'm genuinely too, I'm 30. I'm not that young, but I can't remember when it was. Yeah, I'm slightly too young to remember Tyson's prime, so I can't really remember when it was genuinely the best, the most exciting division in the sport. It's very odd to be in that situation. But I just wanted to get your thoughts really on sort of the state of the division at the moment, and in particular, anything you had to say about either Tyson Fury or Luis Ortiz. I know he fought a couple of weeks ago, and I assume you've watched that one from Monte Carlo.
Yes. Yes.
What were your thoughts on Ortiz first of all? Because it was a very strange performance, I thought.
No, I was disappointed. I thought that he was much too cautious. I think more than anything, I was disappointed in his lack of business acumen. That he didn't seem to understand that this was a showcase for him, that it was going to open up a lot of doors. I mean, he's not a guy who's ever going to fight for a real world title unless there's no choice but to put him in. But I think that Eddie Hearn, there's my age, Barry Hearn, Eddie Hearn, has brought Ortiz in as a kind of paladin for Anthony Joshua, and also as a kind of insurance that he can keep Joshua away from Ortiz. And the idea was that night for Luis Ortiz to look sensational, and he could have done it. And he chose not to, because maybe it's the amateur in him, you win going away every second and that's good enough. But he obviously squandered a real opportunity. I still think he's the best heavyweight in the division, and I think he'll, at least in terms of visuals, will make it up on December 10th.
Yes, well, that's the other one. Is I assume he'll be fighting Dave Allen on December 10th. I don't know. Have you seen Allen before?
I have. I've seen Allen a couple of times before, and if this fight goes 3 rounds, then Ortiz has no one to blame but himself for, really misusing a tremendous opportunity. I mean, this is a fight where Ortiz there's nothing to be done for it but for him to completely crush Allen.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I think Allen has absolutely no business going more than a few rounds. Right. I also think it's a very, very dangerous matchup for Allen potentially, because I'm on the Ortiz train right there with you, and I think although he was, that's the worst I've seen him, to be honest. I don't think I can recall a worse performance. But equally, he won every minute of every round. He knocked Malik Scott down several times. Scott was down to the count of 14, and yet the referee waved it on. I don't think anyone would have objected if he got the stoppage. But yes, I agree with you. It showed a sort of naivety, didn't it, in terms of the commercial side of his career.
Yes, very much so. I mean, I still don't quite understand why it wasn't really emphasized to him that this was being done for him. And I got the impression that the crew at HBO were doing what they could to cooperate with Hearn. I mean, they were saying, well, this fight might not go 1 round. Nobody's willing to get into the ring with him. And Kellerman even went so far as to acknowledge that, Scott's loss to Wilder was a dive.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I noticed that as well. Where and also Sky did the same thing. They said he had a very questionable knockout loss, and you really don't hear that often. And then obviously it backfired when Scott decided that he actually wanted to stick around and go the distance against Ortiz. Just broadening this out a little bit. I remember
Sure.
at the time, obviously. As you said, Ortiz is under real pressure to perform now because I don't know if you're aware that the deal with Matchroom is in the UK is only 2 fights, and then after that, I believe it will be a sort of a rolling. They would extend it on a rolling basis based on how he looks. I would personally like to see him fight the winner of Dillian White versus Derek Chisora because I believe he would beat both of them on the same night, no problem.
Yes. Great
and I think that would really raise his profile with the UK fans, if that makes sense, because there's a lot of guys who are now shrugging their shoulders and saying, "What's all the fuss about?" And it's, you know, as a fan who's sort of been watching him for a couple of years, you know, same boat as you, it's quite frustrating because I really want to see Ortiz in with the top 5 in the division, but at the moment, there's I can't make a case for it because of how bad or sort of how pedestrian he was in the last fight out. So I would like to see him have a big performance on December the 10th, get rid of Dave Allen in 2 or 3 rounds, and then hopefully get a fight with. I think Dillian White will beat Chisora, so I think get a fight with Dillian White maybe in March or something, and maybe the winner that's an eliminator for a title or something. I don't know if they could spin it, but I was going to say the question. Sorry, going back to the question. When they announced that they'd signed Ortiz to a UK promoter, you had a very specific reaction to do with, I think you evoked, was it Tony Tubbs with Mike Tyson as being the kind of enforcer role? Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. Right. Right. Oliver McCall. The idea is that nobody can get through Ortiz. So if you've got a guy who you think might present a problem for Joshua, and at this point, Joshua, although he's got great potential, there's still a lot of unknown stuff out there about him, and he's going to be the cash cow in the division. I mean, he's capable of making more money than maybe anyone has ever seen before. So he has to be protected really very, very carefully. That doesn't mean he can't be put in with guys who can fight. But if there are dangerous guys who might be able to move up in the rankings and fight him in fights that don't make sense, it makes more sense for Hearn as a promoter to say, well, okay, we can do this. Here's what you need to do first. You need to get through Luis Ortiz. Nobody can say no to that because they can't argue that they've earned their shot against Joshua unless they're willing to go through Ortiz, and nobody's going to go through Ortiz. So it was a really brilliant promotional move.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. You can't turn down Ortiz and still maintain that you deserve to fight for a heavyweight title, because no one can be turning down fights with contenders and then claim they should get. Yes, I agree with you. So it's almost checkmate for any dangerous up and comers, isn't it, in the division?
That's right.
But I suppose eventually someone will beat Ortiz, and then maybe they'll be in for a nasty surprise. I think if we're moving on to Joshua slightly, do you see the Ortiz Joshua fight happening at all, let alone in the sort of near future, year or 18 months?
Not in the next year, and probably not in the next 18 months. But here's how I could see that fight playing out. I mean, my guess is Ortiz is 45-ish, give or take a year, well into his mid-40s. He's going to get too old. That will happen. I can't tell you when, but it will. And so there's a time when it will make sense for Joshua to fight him, because the likelihood is Ortiz will still be undefeated, and beating him will mean a lot. So I would say that the business move right now is to do everything you can to get Ortiz a title. Doesn't matter who it's against, because he'll beat anybody. So you force that. And at this point, Hearn has got a little bit of juice worldwide and can maybe make that happen, move him into a mandatory position. And there's enough interest in Ortiz now so that there's money in the fight for him, with a real fight against one of the other sort of recognized title holders, at which point Hearn can start to build up the Joshua Ortiz fight and just wait till the time is right for it. And there are a number of ways to do it. You can wait till Ortiz is too old, but Ortiz is also a businessman, and he's not a young man, and he's got a family. And there's a point at which everybody wants to get out of the game. So maybe you talk to him.
Exactly. He doesn't have the luxury of sort of waiting around for 5 years, does he?
He does not.
I agree with you. I think I could see, again, this is my sort of promotional crystal ball. I think if I was Hearn, or if I was, Ortiz's promoter, whoever it may be, I would go for Wilder, and I would really target the WBC. And in the meantime, I would take Anthony Joshua and do everything I could to make a unification with Joseph Parker, because I think that's quite a winner. That's a winnable
Easy fight.
Yeah, it's a very winnable fight for Joshua, especially in the UK. It would also be a big money fight. There's a lot of Parker gets good ratings on TV in New Zealand. There's a lot of New Zealanders in the UK. They both speak English. They both talk quite well. That's a huge pay-per-view fight. Joshua gets 2 belts. That legitimizes him to a large extent. And meanwhile, you can knock Wilder, who I think I would favor Joshua to beat Wilder, but I think Wilder is a risky fight just because of the right hand mainly. And I would say get Ortiz to deal with him, and then we'll see where the cards are sort of falling in maybe 18 months' time.
That makes tremendous sense. The one potential pitfall for that is, how do you get Wilder into the ring with Ortiz?
Well, it would have to be a mandatory, wouldn't it? Somehow, a bit like Wilder sort of going to Russia to fight Povetkin.
I think there's more of a It would be interesting if Ortiz fought Povetkin, which gives him tremendous credibility. But
yes, Povetkin has a fight, doesn't he? I keep forgetting who his opponent is. Is he? Oh, he's fighting. No, it's not Takam. Takam's fighting Duhapa. That's which a European title fight possibly. Povetkin has a fight lined up. I'm just gonna load it up now because it wasn't a bad one.
Right. He's fighting somebody for real.
He's Stiverne. That was it.
Stiverne, right? But of course, Stiverne. Okay, the problem with Stiverne is is promoted by King.
Yes,
and King is all
unable to have more than one fight a year contractually.
It's not just that. King is looking out for King, and so. Stiverne has clearly done business once before, in a fight that King got the ultimate benefit from, which is the Wilder fight. My guess, I could be wrong about this one, but my guess is that Stiverne is being brought to Russia to lose to Povetkin.
Oh, certainly. And I actually think, regardless of the politics behind it, I think Povetkin will knock Stiverne out regardless. I think Stiverne he's fought once since Wilder, I believe, and he got badly dropped. I think he fought Derek Rossi. Do you know the journeyman?
Yes, really.
I'm gonna dig this up because I could be completely on the wrong track here. But I believe he fought Rossi and he was dropped heavily. And I think Stiverne, again, who's not a particularly young guy, is he? I think he's how old? I think Stiverne's
37 or 38.
Yeah, or 38, I think. And he's he fought Derek Rossi. He won a decision. That was a year ago, and he got dropped heavily. And I think Stiverne is being brought over, and Povetkin is going to look very, very good. But equally, Povetkin's not that young, and he's been around a long time, so they'll have to get moving with him.
And he is off now. I mean, Povetkin, I think, is 37, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he's late 30s, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. And when he's motivated, he's a tough guy. But he's not always motivated.
Yes, and I agree with you. But it's a shame, whatever happened with the drug issue with Wilder, because I felt like both fighters were really motivated for that one. I think that would have been a really good fight. I would have favoured Povetkin, but I was really looking forward to it. And I felt like the whole division was sort of thrown into limbo a little bit, because Povetkin, whatever you say about him, I think he would have been a very active champion. He fights sort of 3 times a year usually, and he's the guy's record in the last sort of really since he lost to Klitschko, he's fought very, very good opponents, by the current standards.
He's a fine fighter. I mean, he's a dangerous guy. He's a legitimate tough guy.
Right. So that was really the heavyweights, and I just wanted to sort of quickly mention Alex Stewart. I don't know if you ever had anything to do with Stewart, who passed away. I believe it was at the end of, was it last weekend or at the end of last week?
Yes.
The last few days, anyway. Did you ever have it? Obviously, Stewart fought Tyson. He was a sort of a high-level contender during the late 80s, early 90s. Born in London, funnily enough, Jamaican ancestry. Fought out of Brooklyn, I think. Did you ever have anything to do with Stewart, or sort of any memories you can share on him?
Well, I didn't have any business dealings with Alex Stewart at all, but I knew Alex Stewart because Alex Stewart was my fighter Tyrone Booth's best friend, and so he lived in Clearwater, Florida, which is where I spent part-time in Florida myself for many years. So I used to run into Alex quite a bit, and we hung out a lot for a short period of time. And he was a lovely guy, just a gentle, easygoing, good-natured, guy. Everybody liked him. He had a strange career. I mean, he was I don't know if you know about his early days, but he was a real darling at the Felt Forum in New York. The New York guys were building him up as a killer. And so most of his fights were in the Felt Forum and Madison Square Garden. And he was a very different kind of fighter than he was promoted as being. And I think in the long run, that did him more harm than good. He reeled off some sensational number of knockouts to begin his career. I don't know if it was a 25 or 28 or something like that.
He was a very hot property, wasn't he, when he was coming up?
He was a very hot property, but it was strange because although clearly we think of New York as a major fight capital, his popularity was entirely regional. And New York, although it's got a kind of cachet worldwide, is not really a major fight center. So building up a fighter in New York doesn't mean as much as it should mean, or as much as people might think it means. So, I mean, Alex did get, a fight with Holyfield, for which presumably he was paid pretty well. But, he lost it. And then, of course, soon after that, he got another good payday to fight Tyson. He got wiped out. And I'm not sure that at that point he ever made any real money. I mean, he got paid. He got paid to fight Michael Moorer, but he didn't get paid a tremendous amount of money to fight Michael Moorer. And he got a good payday against George Foreman. But George Foreman has always been a notoriously difficult negotiator. Nobody got as much money fighting George Foreman when he had the upper hand as you would have imagined. I remember at one point.
That's interesting. I had no idea about it. George. He seems so benevolent and kind when you hear him speaking. I didn't know that.
No, no. I remember I was friendly with a guy, and I'm drawing a blank on what his name is, but he was one of George's matchmakers, a Texan. And he called me at one point about a fight for one of my fighters against George. And he said, well, what do you think of George? And I said, I mean, I don't really know him. He seems like a good guy. And he said, you're going to hate him by the time this is over. And that's what everybody says. I mean, he was just merciless in terms of negotiating. So, I mean, Alex, if you're around today, would be very much in the mix. He might win titles. He certainly would be. I'm not sure if I look at everyone who's the world champion, with the exception of Joshua, I'm not sure that he couldn't beat anyone who's out. I mean, I leave Ortiz in a separate category, of course, but I'm not sure that there's anyone who Alex might not have handled, and he would have been very busy.
I think I sort of jumped in on a conversation you were having the other day where the theme was the sort of lost I suppose, lost tier of heavyweights in the current generation, where guys like Stewart, guys like Tony Tucker, even guys sort of like Bruce Seldon to an extent, they just don't really exist anymore. So you don't have those guys that you can build quality guys that are prospect, but beatable, at the top level.
Right.
That class of fighter just doesn't exist with the heavyweights anymore, and therefore there is a huge gulf, and I think we see it in a number of divisions now, between sort of domestic or regional level, be it NABO or European or whatever, and then world level. There is a huge gulf, and it is so hard to kind of bridge that gap without just jumping in head first and
Right. No, that's true. Well, I mean, I think if we're talking about heavyweights during that era where there was a very deep tier of frontline heavyweights who were not necessarily championship level, or they were, one fight championship level. You have to understand that Don King controlled the heavyweight division, and he controlled it entirely. And, these guys all trained in the same training camp constantly. So they were getting superb work on a day-to-day basis, and they became very good fighters. That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and they improved each other. Am I right? They were sort of they were getting the best out of each other by competing, like you say, on a daily basis.
Well, it was interesting. It was a very, it was sort of very sophisticated makeup in the sense that they were getting really good work, and they were all developing tremendous survival skills. So, they were good defensive fighters. They all knew what to do. They also all understood the business. But as this was going on, they were sort of being demoralized on a, very functional basis. I mean, they were in this god-awful camp at Orwell, Ohio, and they were really kind of kept on the shelf all the time. So they didn't think of themselves as champions. So, if guys like Tucker or Tubbs or Page or Thomas wound up being champion, it was a sort of accidental champion, and it was a sort of chess match champion in the sense that they held this marketable token that could be taken away from them at any time. I'm convinced, for example, that Oliver McCall, who in many ways I felt was the most dangerous of the bunch, not the most accomplished, but the most dangerous, came to London to hand the title over to Frank Bruno, a guy I think he could have knocked out anytime he wanted to.
Yeah, he's very, very what's the word? Alluring, McCall, I suppose is the word. A really interesting guy. I don't know if there's ever been a book written about him. I'd read a book about Oliver McCall. I think he's fascinating. Or they should do a film about him or something. I don't know. They seem to be doing a lot of films about boxers at the moment.
Well, he was an interesting one. He's a funny guy.
And one of the best chins of all time as well, of course, which certainly doesn't hurt when you're a heavyweight. Charles, I'm aware that you're sort of reasonably pushed for time. Do you have another sort of 10 minutes or so? Is that all right, or do you need to shoot off?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, perfect. Well, I thought we could end with a preview of the upcoming weekend, just because we've got a very, very interesting fight on Saturday night on HBO, which is, of course, Vasyl Lomachenko defending his a WBO, isn't it? Lightweight belt against Nicholas Walters. Again, well, I always think of Lomachenko as undefeated, but I suppose he has got one defeat, hasn't he? But Walters is undefeated. Two very, very highly ranked guys, both sort of clearly top 5 in the division. Are you looking forward to this one, and how do you see it going?
I'm very, very much looking forward to this one. Lately, I've been horrible in terms of predicting. And I'm almost alone here in liking Walters. But I think that the deck is stacked very heavily for Lomachenko, who's a money guy. I mean, there are all kinds of possibilities for him. He's a very talented fighter. And much to my surprise, seeing the two guys next to each other, it looked to me as if there was virtually no difference in their size. And one of my reasons for liking Walters so much in the fight is I just assumed he was going to completely dwarf Lomachenko.
Yeah, that was strange. I saw those pictures as well, and I can remember, Lomachenko looking visibly smaller than Salido, and now all of a sudden he looks the same size as Walters. I don't know if I feel like fighters are getting quite creative with their footwear, because I remember at the weigh-in, Andre Ward looked significantly taller than Kovalev, but then if you actually looked at the picture, he was wearing sort of very large sort of Air Max sneakers or whatever it was. And then when they were actually in the ring, they were virtually identical in height. And Kovalev was quite a lot bigger, I felt, in terms of his shoulders and his arms. Yeah, I think maybe when Walters is rehydrated, you might see a bit of a size difference. But Lomachenko, to me, looks like he's really growing into the weight. And obviously, we're all impressed with him pretty much every time he fights. But I think he's slowly going to the next level. And for a while, the safe bet is a Lomachenko decision, isn't it? But I'm thinking he might knock Walters out and make a real statement, because I've always felt Walters was a little bit overrated based on beating up Darchinyan and Donaire, who neither of them had any business at featherweight, I don't think. And I felt he was a little bit overrated off that, and I feel like I've seen him hurt a couple of times in fights. And I think if Lomachenko wants to, and he really starts to put it on him, I think he can get him out. But it's a fantastic fight. What do you think the winner does next? Because I think lightweight's a tremendous division at the moment, really, really stacked.
Well, I mean, it's not a really fungible situation, in that they don't go the same place. If Walters wins, I'm not sure that his options are necessarily as great. I mean, one of the things that, for example, Lomachenko could do, which obviously Walters could not, is I'm trying to think, the 140-pound division is so red hot right now that there are places that, I mean, look, okay, here's an example. I don't know that this will happen, but Lomachenko could say, well, I'll go up and I'll fight Crawford. And Crawford could say, yeah, I'll stick around at 140. That is a colossally big fight, and it's a no-lose fight for Lomachenko.
It's very funny you say that, because do you know the fight that I know Aram, during fight week, he has a habit of throwing out these crazy matchups, doesn't he? But the one he mentioned a few days ago was Lomachenko against Pacquiao.
I did hear that.
Yeah, which again, I read the headline and did a double take and was a bit confused. And then you think about it and you think, well, Pacquiao came up from 118 or whatever it was, and he was a flyweight once upon a time, and Lomachenko's come up from featherweight, and I guess it wouldn't be that ridiculous, and potentially that's a really, really good fight. I think. Because Pacquiao can make 140, no problem at all. I mean, I feel like Pacquiao walks around at about 150, let alone.
Yeah, he's a small guy. It's true, but I mean that would take a lot of retooling to do. Not because, I mean, they could do a catch weight, they could do anything they want, and they could call it 143 or something like that. The problem is that although Pacquiao is really a junior welterweight, he's held the title at welterweight. He's fought big guys. And so it's a question of perception. And I think that's a tough image to promote. Now, of course, Pacquiao, you can put him in with anybody and you can make some money. But I think that's a tough sell. I think that Crawford is an easier fight to sell. And I'm not even sure if it doesn't wind up being close to as big a fight. Because it would be seen as a more plausible fight. So I think that would be probably the way to go. With Walters, I'm trying to think what would make sense with him if he were to
Well,
win
I
it.
mean, surely, it will be a rematch for a lot more money, wouldn't it? That would be the only way to go, really. I think the amount that they're investing in Lomachenko, you'd think they'd want him to avenge the defeat. But equally, I suppose would maybe yeah, I suppose 135. It's tricky, isn't it? Maybe he could fight Sosa again. Unification. I suppose it would be this time.
Nobody would care. Nobody would care.
No, no, you're right.
So they can't do that. I mean, and the fact is, he won that fight very easily.
Yeah, I think that was. I think there's a pretty good argument he won every single round.
Yeah.
That was a decision we seem to have forgotten about generally as fans, but that was an awful one. Yeah, real stinker.
So that's not a fight that would that we would see again. Nobody's going to want to fight him if let's say, look, if he beats Lomachenko, there's only one way that he beats him, right? He knocks him out. And if no one wants him now, who will want him as a much more dangerously perceived guy?
Do you think
yeah.
Do you think a fight with someone like Vargas or maybe even Salido? Top Rank have or HBO have about 4 or 5 guys loyal to them who are really interesting at the top of that division.
Those are good fights, but again, we're trying to think in terms of where the really big money could be, which is a different issue. I mean, those are great. I mean, Salido really doesn't factor into any of this anymore. Unless Lomachenko wants a revenge fight, and why would he? It's not a fight it's not a superstar fight. The Crawford fight is a superstar fight, and it's a fight that he can lose. If he loses, there's no collateral damage.
Yes, exactly. No one will write him off for getting beaten by Terence Crawford. Yes, I agree with you.
I mean, Kell Brook did himself no harm whatsoever in fighting Golovkin. I mean, if anything, his stock has risen.
Yes, well, exactly. I think it has, and strangely enough, his bargaining power at 147 seems to have improved from taking the defeat. And I think this is great. I really, if there's one thing I wish would change about this current era, it's the way people cling on to their O in the loss column, as if that sort of magically increases their standing. And to give you a recent example, I gained more respect for a guy like Leo Santa Cruz in his defeat to Frampton than I had done from any of his wins. And I now consider myself a fan and will watch his fights going forward, because I felt like he acquitted himself really well in defeat, and he's obviously gone straight for the rematch. He's not going for a soft touch. He's not hiding away and sort of going after some meaningless alphabet title. I was very impressed by both the winner and the loser.
Well, no, that's right. I mean, that's the kind of re-education that at this point would do boxing a lot of good, because you've got two really good fighters who are evenly matched. They fight a tremendous fight that, depending on how you see things, could have gone either way.
Well, I actually had it a draw. I had it a draw, funnily enough.
You had a draw. Okay, so yeah. I mean, either way or neither way, the return match will be, obviously is going to be much, much bigger. If Santa Cruz wins it, and I think it's to everybody's benefit, believe it or not, to score this thing right down the line. And if he does win it, because it's going to go to a decision, give it to him, and then have the rematch in Belfast, which will be the biggest fight in Irish history.
Yes. Yeah.
It'll be another big fight.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
You know who? I'll tell you. It just occurred to me who Walters could fight if he beats Lomachenko. He could beat Jorge. He could fight Jorge Linares.
Yes, I think. Yeah, he's certainly big enough to move up a division, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, that'll be a great one. I think Linares is. I always feel like he's been weirdly underappreciated during his career, but now he's starting to get that kind of headline credibility back, I think.
Well, the Crowler fight did him a lot of good, but he's a guy I actually overestimated. When he turned pro, I think I watched his first dozen fights, and I told people in the business, I think we're seeing Alexis Arguello here. And, clearly I overstated my case.
Well, you weren't the only one. I think Emmanuel Stewart as well, didn't he? I remember him being extraordinarily positive about Linares as a fighter, and I think it was, you can't legislate for sort of a weak chin, I guess.
Right.
But equally, I think he's improved massively in terms of making sure his chin is tucked up, which is, nothing wrong with that. He's got a weakness, but he's learned how to defend it, and I think that's something that should be admired.
I agree.
Charles, I'm wary of your time, so I just wanted to finish very, very quickly with the question I posed to you earlier, which was if the following all retire in 2017 or have their last fight in 2017, who goes to the Hall of Fame, who misses out on the Hall of Fame and why? So the four I gave you were, I think this is actually quite a feasible scenario. If Roy Jones, Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather, and Bernard Hopkins all have their final fight in 2017, 5 years later, which one misses out on going to the Hall of Fame on the first ballot?
I think Manny Pacquiao makes it without question. I don't see how he can keep from being a first ballot.
No, I don't think anyone could make a case. Yeah, there's no case to be made that he should be cut from that.
I think the same thing happens with Mayweather. I can't imagine how Mayweather is kept out. There are people who think he's the best fighter who ever lived. I mean, it's nonsense, of course, but so Mayweather makes it. Then Jones does not. And
did you ever think you'd be saying that back in sort of 1989, 2000?
Never. As a matter of fact, he would have been the first on the list. So I forget. Are we keeping Marquez in this one too, or not?
Well, I think I threw Marquez in as a sort of curveball, but I think he's quite clearly, no disrespect to him, great fighter, but he's maybe one notch below, isn't he? I think it's either Hopkins or Jones. One of them has to miss out.
Jones is the one who misses out. It's Mayweather, Pacquiao, and Hopkins.
Yeah, and imagine, saying that sort of 15 years ago would have been unthinkable. I mean, I think the quote that I always see bandied about is that if Jones had retired after he beat Ruiz at heavyweight, he would have been possibly in the top 10 of all time. Maybe not to the true historians, but I think perception would have been that he was one of a handful of the greatest ever.
Oh, there's no question about that. There's no question that he would have been. And I'm hard put to include, what I consider to be sort of contemporary generation fighters in anywhere near the top 10 of all time, just because they don't have the fights, they don't have the experience, they don't have the competition, and they're not measured against, great fighters. But I would have had Roy very, very high. I wouldn't have had him in the top 10, but I probably would have had him in the top 30, and that's that's
he would have been in the conversation. Yeah, and he would have been surrounded by some extraordinary fighters, right, from history. Yes, I agree with you, and it's a real sort of, I suppose it's a real tragedy when you put it that way. In terms of, I mean, he's still a Hall of Famer, isn't he? He's still a great, one of the greatest of his era, but it's funny how quickly sort of things can change. And with Hopkins, how quickly. Oh, I suppose it's not necessarily quick.
Not quickly.
Given that he's 50, but he's very much sort of come up late and gradually really staked a very strong claim to be a first ballot guy, and will possibly be ranked right alongside Jones when it comes to people who tally up their top, the top 100 of all time or the top 150 or whatever it is, and that's something that we never could have foreseen in when did they fight? 1994 was it, or something like that?
Well, let me say something just to close out, because this is interesting. Yes. As you know, I was business partners with Pat Petronelli for many years, and Pat, of course, was one of Marvin Hagel's co-managers. And when Roy was about to fight James Toney, we were sitting around the gym one day, and I said to Pat, I think this guy would beat Marvin. And you can imagine that's sacrilege at the
Yes.
Petronas gym. And there was a short pause, and Pat said, maybe so. That gives you an indication of how the kind of esteem that Roy Jones in his prime was held.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do think to an extent, some of Jones's early wins are now not forgotten, but they're kind of underrated in a way because so many fans have only seen him, as a sort of, I don't want to say a has-been. It sounds a bit harsh, but a guy who wins some and loses some at a fringe level, which is really what all he's done for the last decade.
Right.
And it's a real shame because he is damaging his legacy, whether he knows it or not. But obviously this is a whole other conversation we can go down. Charles, I just want to give you, we had a couple of very, very good connections for the 6 Degrees game. So,
good.
So just to give you the answer, my one that started the whole thing off was, if you begin with Julio Cesar Chavez, you go to Oscar De La Hoya, so that's 1. You go to Manny Pacquiao, that's 2. You go to Emmanuel Lucero, 3. You go to Patrick Hyland, 4, and then you go to Josh Warrington as number 5. And then we had a couple that took it in a completely different direction, which was Chavez to, I'll let you see if you can fill in the gap here. It was Chavez to Grover Wiley, to Dimitri Salita, to Amir Khan, then to Steve Gethin, and then to Josh Warrington. So that's a bit of a UK-centric flavour. And then the other one we had was Chavez to Costa Zoo, to Zab Judah, to Amir Khan, to Gethin, to Warrington.
Very good.
I would never have dreamed of mentioning Steve Gethin on the pod other than that. But Charles, I hope I haven't made you late for dinner or anything. But I just want to say thank you very much for joining us again, and we'll hope to get you back on. I imagine probably in the new year, just because we're sort of almost at the end of the good run of fights in 2016, and we've got a very good January. What's shaping up as a really good January that I'd love to get you on to break down and analyze in the new year.
Wonderful. Please do invite me.
But thank you very much. I certainly will. And yes, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you have a nice evening.
Thank you. Thanks. Take care.
Thanks again for your time. Thank you.
You bet. Bye.